Hey guys, today we're going to be reviewing the MSI Versa 300 wireless 8K gaming mouse. Now this will be a slightly quicker review than usual as this was a pretty tight turnaround, so rather than going super in depth, it's going to be more of a real world take on what it's like to actually use. I'm also not a competitive FPS player, so this isn't going to be a super technical breakdown, more just a look at how it performs day to day. That said, on paper, this is actually pretty well spec'd, especially for the price, but we'll go through all of those different specs as we go throughout the video. Now inside the box you've got the mouse itself, a USB receiver which is actually stored underneath the mouse, a USB-C cable for charging and wired use, and MSI are calling this a friction-free cable, and I've got to say I'm really impressed with it. It's about 2 meters long, really soft, really flexible, and doesn't catch the desk at all. If you're using this wired, it genuinely feels pretty close to using it wireless. Also a nice little pink touch on the USB-A end, just something a little bit different. In terms of the mouse itself, design-wise it's quite safe, it doesn't really stand out visually. It's coming in at 66 grams, which is very lightweight, especially for a wireless mouse with a battery. A few years ago that wasn't really a thing, so it's nice to see how far things have come. There's a pretty standard scroll wheel and a preset for the DPI switch. This goes all the way up to 26,000, but realistically you're not going to get anywhere near that. I've actually been using the 6400 preset, which was higher than I usually used to run, but something that I got used to pretty quickly. Now MSI using on switches here rated for around 60 million clicks, and in theory these should hold up pretty well over time. And in terms of the click sound, I'll also drop a quick sound sample from the unboxing so you can get an idea of how these sound. On the side you've got the usual side buttons along with the diamond style grip on both sides. It's not overly aggressive but does give you more control, especially if your hands get sweatier during longer sessions. We've also got a bit of RGB lighting as well towards the rear where your palm sits. It's quite subtle but I actually prefer that. It's not overly bright either, which should also help a little bit with the battery life. Now underneath you've got the skates, the sensor and the slot where the USB receiver is stored. The skates themselves are actually really smooth. I showed this in the unboxing and it slid across the mouse mat with barely any effort. So if you're into faster, more responsive movements, especially in games, that's definitely something you'll appreciate. The sensors are Pixar 3395 and that's paired with an 8K polling rate. What that basically means is it's registering your inputs incredibly quickly, which is something you normally only see on wired mice a few years ago. Now realistically though, most people aren't going to notice a huge difference running at 8K, and it will also impact your battery life, so for most people something like 1 or 2K is probably going to make more sense running day to day. You've also got a switch for turning it off, turning it onto Bluetooth or using the 2.4 GHz wireless, which MSI calls Swift Speed. So if you want to use this for something like a laptop over Bluetooth, you've also got that option there. And also because it's so lightweight, it's just a really easy mouse to throw in a bag and take with you. Now it's also a symmetrical design, so it's going to work for both left and right-handed users, and also generally supports most grip styles. In terms of comfort, I will say it's on the slimmer side. For me personally, I've got quite big hands, so I'd prefer something with a little bit more width. But that said, it's not a deal breaker, just something you need to get used to over time, and I wouldn't say it's a reason to avoid it. In terms of software, this runs through MSI Center, specifically the gaming gear section. It's pretty basic but it does everything you'd expect, like button remapping and simple macros. You can customize things like DPI levels and polling rate through the software as well. For example, I mapped a shortcut on the side buttons for dictation that I use on my PC, so I'll just hold a button and start speaking, something that I use quite a lot day to day. If you want something a little bit more advanced, you might want to look elsewhere, but for most people the software will be absolutely fine. There's also MSI's Portal X software if you want a bit more control over things with the RGB lighting, which I didn't see directly within the gaming gear section, and personally I haven't really dived into that too much. And it's also worth keeping in mind that things like lighting are going to impact the battery life anyway, so if you're aiming them for maximum longevity, you're probably better off keeping that fairly minimal or turning it all off altogether. Now MSI are quoting 196 hours of battery life, which is a really big number. Realistically that's going to depend quite a lot on how you're using it, especially with different polling rates and lighting. But just to put that into some kind of context, if you're going to use this for general work, say a typical 9 to 5, that's potentially a couple of weeks of use between needing to charge. Or if you're more of a casual gamer, maybe playing for a few hours in the evening, you might be able to get a month out of it, which is obviously very good. Now, once you start pushing things at higher polling rates, especially to 8K, that's where you'll see the number come down quite a bit, which is pretty standard for mice like this. Now, just to be upfront, this video is quite a tight turnaround, so I haven't had long enough to actually test the battery life myself. This is also going to be collected as well, so I'm going to be using MSI's figures more as a reference point rather than real-world results. Now, one thing I do want to touch upon is the price. This is going to come in at around $59.99. Initially, I thought it might be closer to $40, $45, which back then was probably a little bit optimistic. But when you actually look at what you're getting here, especially with the 8K polling rate, the 3395 sensor and the lightweight wireless design, it actually makes a lot more sense, especially considering you're also getting 8K polling on a wireless mouse at this price point. A few years ago, something like that would have easily been over £100, especially with 8K polling, which was pretty much limited to wireless mice. So to see that now in a wireless mouse around £60 is actually really nice to see. And £60 for me personally is the price point where I'd want to be spending my money. Anything more than that I just find a little bit excessive, and it's going to be a bit harder to justify unless you're really into competitive gaming. So I think they've got the price point with this one bang on. So overall, it's a solid lightweight wireless mouse that just gets the job done. It's comfortable, responsive, has a great set of features. It doesn't really massively stand out in what's a quite competitive market, and the design is fairly safe. But if you just want a reliable wireless gaming mouse with good specs and a nice feel in the hand, it's a solid choice. Now, as I mentioned, this was a pretty quick turnaround, so if there's anything that I haven't covered you'd like to know, please do leave a comment and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. I'll also leave the links in the description box below if you want to check it out. Big thank you to MSI for sending this out for me to review, and as always, thanks for watching. I'll see you all in the next one.